Now on Overnights,
I believe in reason and common sense.
Leith Van Onselen from Macro Business with the treasury of common sense.
Common sense never goes out of style.
The New South Wales budget handed down this week, the Queensland budget last week. Now, in New South Wales, they're looking at 9 straight deficits, and a lot of this has got to do with the divide up of the GST, as we were discussing on the program yesterday. But the centrepiece of the budget is very much housing. That's what the Minns government's main policy initiatives surround. But the stresses on housing are no doubt because of the record number of migrants coming here. We chat to Leith Van Onselen about these issues every week, the co-founder of Macro Business. G'day, Leith.
G'day, Clinton. How are you?
I'm good, mate. I spent a lot of time yesterday examining the budget. What was your view of it?
Yeah, look, I suppose it was to be expected by a lot of, in a lot of respects. I mean, we obviously heard that New South Wales got their GST revenue cut, several months ago. And there was a lot of, to and fro about that. New South Wales got theirs cut, Victoria's got theirs increased, which seemed, massively unfair given that obviously New South Wales is receiving the most net overseas migrants. And, I suppose as a result of that, the New South Wales budget slipped from an expected $2 billion surplus over the next 3 years to a $8.5 billion deficit. And, a lot of that was obviously attributable to lower GST revenue, but there also has been a lot of, extra expenditure. Most notably, I think there was about $5 billion on the 8,400 new social homes. There was about, $9 billion towards schools, new schools and upgrading schools, and $1 billion to tackle maintenance on schools, and then a couple $1 billion for the Parramatta Light Rail, and about $1 billion for new roads. So there was a lot of expenditure, and I'd argue that expenditure is required because New South Wales received a record 185,000 net overseas migrants in 2023. That's the latest data, and that was actually 100% of New South Wales' population growth. And also, the latest federal budget that was released in May forecast that New South Wales' population is going to grow by just under 500,000 people in the 4 years to 2027. So obviously, if you're going to bring in all these people, you've got to provide infrastructure, services, houses, all those things for them. And this is the age-old problem that we talk about almost every week, it seems, in that the federal government is running the big migration program. They're collecting the benefits from big migration through increased personal and company taxes. But the cost of that big migration is falling on the state governments and also us as, residents who've then got to pay. When state governments who are cash-strapped then have to sell everything off, and then you end up building toll roads with, using Transurban and private companies and all this sort of thing, that ends up pushing up our costs as well. So I think this is just another example, and we've seen it with the other states as well, of, New South Wales is growing very quickly. It's growing because of net overseas migration. It has to provide services, housing, infrastructure, all those things for those people. It doesn't collect the tax benefit from that migration. Therefore, it's plunged the state government into deficit. I think it's as simple as that.
It's interesting, Leith, how this is playing out politically, because I had the Premier on my program yesterday, and with Daniel Mookhey, the Treasurer, they very much blame these deficits on the $11.9 billion lost in GST revenue over the next 4 years, and they do make the point that New South Wales takes on the greatest number of migrants. But when you push them on the immigration issue, it's interesting with the Labor Party at the state level, they don't want to put the boot into elbow about immigration. But the opposition, and maybe this is just the reality of politics, Mark Speakman's actually been on the front foot since January saying New South Wales needs fewer migrants, despite the fact, there are issues in different sectors of shortages of staff. He says, let's get on a unity ticket, Chris Minns. Let's write to the Prime Minister and beg him to ease the pressure on New South Wales.
Yeah, and I'd actually take that one step further. I mean, really, New South Wales should really team up with Victoria. Those are the two biggest states who are receiving the overwhelming majority of the international migrants. And they're also the two states that are stuck in the biggest deficits and with the most debt. And it's no coincidence. I mean, obviously Victoria's, I'd argue that they're incredibly incompetent as well. But the reality of the situation is both those two states are receiving, massive amounts of migrants. So New South Wales, 185,000 net overseas migrants in 1 year. That was 100% of your population growth. And Victoria, about 165,000 net overseas migrants. So obviously those two states are, experiencing the burden from this big Australia immigration. They're both the states that are forecast to grow the fastest. So therefore, they need more revenue in order to pay for infrastructure, housing, public housing, social housing, government services, all those sorts of things. And I've said it previously. I honestly think the state should push back and demand $50,000 in funding for every, new resident that settles in their states, because the reality of the situation is the federal government collects 82% of the nation's tax revenue. It gets all the benefits from migration, from higher income taxes, higher company taxes, which is why the Australian Treasury always pushes for more migration. But the costs are then deferred onto the other parties, and then the states are one of those parties that suffers. So I think a fairer distribution of revenue is in order here, so that New South Wales, Victoria, and all the other states that profit from this can provide adequate housing and infrastructure and all services for the new people that are arriving. I think it's pretty basic math.
Completely agree. Just from a broader economic point of view, so into the forward estimates last year when Daniel Mookhey handed down his first budget, he was going to forecast surpluses in the forward estimates. They're now at deficits. Combine that with Victoria. How much? That's going to be potentially 9 straight deficits in New South Wales. How much of a big problem is that to then reverse that down the track, or does it just keep building on itself?
Yeah, I think the biggest problem with the debt build-up across Australia, so obviously the federal government's expected to go into deficit, but not that much really. But again, the main problem is the states. So the states are carrying the nation's debt burden across the levels of government. And the thing that concerns me about it is we're doing it almost at the top of an economic cycle. So we're doing it when we've got sort of low unemployment. Obviously, economic growth's not great, but we've got high commodity prices, things like that, and that cycle would turn. We've also got obviously rising house prices, so the housing market's strong, which means more stamp duty revenue and those sorts of things. So we're doing it with a pretty decent backdrop, and my concern is that if we do, if commodity prices fade, and then we've got a housing downturn, and then obviously we have a sharpish rise in unemployment, which I think is fairly likely, then the fiscal situation across the country, so I'm not just talking states, I'm talking state and federal, could worsen materially. And I think that's when it becomes a problem. So, really given that the Reserve Bank's trying to slow the economy and run a contractionary policy, governments across the board should be running surpluses. And that it's sort of counterintuitive that they're running deficits at the same time as the Reserve Bank is trying to actually tighten monetary policy and slow the economy and slow inflation. So, fiscal policy is working out of whack with monetary policy. I think that's the problem.
Yeah, I like your idea of $50,000 per migrant. Leith, thank you, mate. We'll catch up again soon.
Yeah, cheers, Clinton. Speak to you next time.
Leith Van Elselen from Macro Business.